Hello, PARSQUAD family. Welcome back to another video. This is first PC building experience by, of course, you know who, Bog. Let's get into the video.
I owned many computers before, and every time that they got slow and got in the way of me having fun, I always...
Why is there a PowerPoint slide? It's like, is he trying to say, like, the computer's clicking so slow that it feels like he's, like, on a PowerPoint slide? Is that what he means? I don't know.
had the itch to get a new one, and this is exactly the itch I'm feeling now. I can't enjoy gaming with friends, not because of school, work, or spending too much time with your mom, it's because my gaming laptop has gotten too slow for me.
Holy cow, I don't think that's good in my opinion. I'm not sure if that is good. I'm not sure if it's terrible. I'm not sure.
Have a simple goal. A PC that can completely rip through the games I want to play and handle some video editing, all within a reasonable budget. No RGB, no fancy nothing. Just a PC that destroys. I don't want a Windows laptop because PCs are cheaper, quieter, they run a lot faster for the same price, and I already have a MacBook, which is a great laptop. The problem is that I've never built a PC before, from scratch, compiled from source. From afar, it doesn't seem that hard. It's Lego for adults. All you have to do is spend some money and know the parts you need. But then, what kind of parts do you need? How do you know if they can work together? How do you put them together? What if you accidentally buy one crappy part that slows down all the other ones? What if the PC doesn't turn on? What are BIOS? All these thoughts were spinning in my head as I wondered whether I should buy a pre-built PC or build my own. Obviously. Since it's cheaper to build one, and presumably more fun because you get to build the expensive Legos you bought, I decided to go down that path. This is where I
like that he calls them expensive Legos, because a computer is kind of like Legos, like you put it together, so it kind of makes sense why he would say like expensive Legos, because it's like with Legos you actually put stuff together, and with a computer you put it together.
Immediately hit a wall. What should I spend my doubloons on? I wrote down all the parts my PC will need and then started the research. Compared a bunch of processors, motherboards, GPUs, looked at benchmarks, whether the parts are compatible, and after 2 long weeks, they arrived. The processor, AMD Ryzen 7 7800X 3D. The processor.
I've actually had some really good things about AMD. I like AMD, but I'm an Intel person. I'm not like just saying because Intel's. I'm not just because I have Intel. I'm not saying it's better. It's just that what I like to use personally. I like to use Intel since I've used Wintel on all my computers that I have or I've had over my time.
Cooler, Thermalite Peerless Assassin 120 SE. The RAM, Corsair Vengeance DDR5 32GB. The storage, Crucial P3 Plus 2TB M.2 PCIe Gen 4 NVMe internal SSD. These names.
That's a lot of words, and he read it as fast as possible. Holy cow. I'm not sure how he read all of that in like a few seconds.
Motherboard, Asus Prime 650B Plus. The power supply, Corsair RM850E. The graphics card, AMD Radeon RX 7800 XT. The case, Corsair 4000D Airflow. I leave the list of parts in the description, so let's put them together. The first thing I learned from watching a bunch of PC build tutorials is to first plug in the power supply, make sure to turn it on, and then every time I move my feet, just touch the metal part of it to get rid of the static electricity. I moved it to the side and tried not to forget to do it. Next, everything goes into the motherboard, so I unpacked that, and there's also a handy manual in the box which tells you where all the things should go. I also found it online. Then we have the I/O shield and some cables. The first thing I'm going to install is the CPU, the processor. It goes here in the middle. I first had to push down this lever, which was way harder than anticipated, lift it up, and then the cover, and there was this little triangle on one of the sides. There's also one on the CPU. So I made sure they align and carefully put it into the socket without applying any pressure. This was scary. Then I wiggled it a bit to make sure it's seated correctly, and everything seemed to be fine. Also, if you don't find that triangle, you can align the CPU using these cutouts on each side. Then I lowered the lid, and all that was left was to push the lever down and lock it in place. Again, I expected this to require way less pressure, but eventually I got it down there. That's what he said. said. The lid popped open and we're good to go. Also, don't throw this out because I heard Linus say that if you do and you want to return your motherboard, they might not accept it. Next, the RAM. According to the motherboard's manual, if I have 2 sticks of RAM, I need to install them into the gray slots, the middle one and the outside one, for the best performance. I lowered these things on the side, the other side didn't have them, then aligned the RAM sticks with a little gap in the middle and pushed on both sides with equal force until I heard a click. Once again, I expected I'll need a little less force than I did. Beautiful.
Yeah, that's the thing about computers is that you're going to have to put some, you don't want to put like a crap ton of like a force. Like, you want to put like a reasonable amount because not everything will go down with like really slight pressure. Because then the computer won't boot up because something's not fully in. So that's why you need to fully, like, you want to make sure like you hear like a click or something, or you actually see it that's all the way done, like with the I would say the bar for the chip or for your CPU. You want to make sure like you could see that like it's not coming back up, and like for your RAM you want to make sure like you hear it click in. Because then you actually know it's actually in, so then you don't have to worry about it and have it like fail on you, or you know that's like not one of the problems that if it doesn't boot, then you know that's not one of the problems that are messed up.
And next was where things didn't go too smooth. It was time for the SSD storage. During this whole build, I had the Linus FOV PC building tutorial open, and for some reason I thought, I know how to install an SSD. So here's what I did. There are 2 spots on this motherboard for NVMe SSDs. These are regular SSDs that plug in with the SATA cable, and these are NVMe, which plug in straight into the motherboard. So one was here under this metal cooling thing, and another one here. So I unscrewed the cooling thing with my Swiss Army knife. By the way, it has some thermal paste under it, so don't forget to peel the plastic or it will render it useless. So next I inserted the SSD at an angle into the slot, and then this was the mistake. You see, this SSD didn't come with anything else other than a little screw. So I thought, yep, all I need to do is screw it in. As I was doing it, I thought it was...
Wait. Please tell me there's a spacer in that, please. One thing that you don't want to do is bend an NVMe SSD. You could break it, even though they're pretty strong. Like, it's pretty hard to break them, but like it could crack in half, and then boom, like you lose like storage or something that doesn't work because it was on the other half of the chip that broke. So then you can't really use the storage to its full potential because you don't have all your storage, or something broke. So I really hope that he has a screw, or no. I really hope that he has a spacer, or else he's kind of screwed, because it could maybe, because if it bends too much, then it could snap in half, or maybe come out, and then he wouldn't know that it came out. So then that's not good, because then when he boots up the computer, his SSD won't be shown because it doesn't see it. So that's why I really hope that he put a spacer in.
kind of weird that the SSD was bending a little bit. And then it even...
No. This is exactly what I didn't want him to do. He doesn't have a spacer in it, which is not good.
popped out as I was screwing it in. So then I thought, nah, this should be fine. Then I peeled off the plastic cover from the shield, installed the shield, looked at it for a little bit, and decided to resume the Linus tutorial. Turns out that inside of the motherboard box there were these SSD spacers, which I should have installed first before I screwed in the SSD. So I quickly took off the cooling shield, and you can...
Okay, at least he actually watched the Linus tutorial of him, like him installing an SSD. I'm happy that he actually didn't just keep the spacer out of the computer. I wouldn't have been happy, to be honest. Like, I feel like even that's probably maybe a beginner's mistake on a computer. You don't want to do that. It's the worst thing you can do. So
see that it was only touching it in a few spots, which means that the SSD was bent. So I installed the spacer and then everything was fine. Next was time for the cooler on top of the CPU. The instructions for AMD said I only needed to remove these plastic things and leave the original backplate in place. If this was an Intel CPU, I would have to change the backplate underneath the motherboard as well. Then I had to install the metal brackets with screws and metal standoffs. Everything came in the box. The red ones are the ones I needed because it said AM4, AM5 on them. It took a little bit of processing to figure out how everything goes in, but the manual helped me out again. First the red things, then the bent metal brackets on top, but upside down, and finally the screws. I tightened them, but not over tightened. Then I applied the thermal paste in this cross pattern with dots on each side, not too much, not too little. Finally, it was time to put in the cooler. There's a sticker on the bottom, so make sure to take it off, otherwise your processor will cook. I aligned it onto the screws from the third attempt.
That is true. If you don't take off that plastic warning thing, then the cooler will pretty much be rendered useless because it wouldn't be cooling the actual CPU because there's nothing, or because it can't actually touch the CPU, so then it can't cool it. So
and then tightened them bit by bit on each side until I felt hard resistance. Beautiful. This cooler has two fans and the fan connector is right there. Also, air comes in from the nicer part of the fan and blows out the backside where the rails are. So I want to install it this way so that the air comes in from the front and goes out the back of the motherboard. This is the backside because of the I/O, like your USB and audio connectors. So they'll be at the back of the case where air comes out. I also learned that you don't want negative pressure inside your case, meaning that there should be the same amount or more fans pushing air in than out. No? Yes. Each fan has a cable and
actually you want another reason why you want positive pressure in a computer. If you have too many output fans and it's negative pressure, but you want positive pressure, which means you have more input fans than export fans, because that can actually reduce the amount of dust that's on the computer or that builds up on the computer, which makes it better.
it plugs in here next to the CPU. It will be labeled CPU fan. So I rotated the fan so that the cable just barely makes it to the connector for nice cable management. To attach the fans to the cooler, there were these metal clips included in the case, so I installed them to the outer side of the fan and then clipped it onto these parts of the cooler. The other fan should go in the same way, so air in this side and air out that side. I put on the clips and installed it as well. It was time to connect the cables. This splitter came in the box with the cooler, but I thought it would ruin my nice cable management, so I plugged in one fan into the CPU_fan connector and the other one into the AIO pump. That's because Linus did the same in his tutorial. Turns out AIO pump stands for all-in-one pump, and it's just a more powerful connector, which means that the fan will spin faster. I want them spinning the same, so hopefully later in the BIOS I'll be able to set their speed to be the same. Now only later I found out that I could have plugged in the other one here, CPU_opt for optional, and not have to deal with the BIOS fan control, but let's pretend I did it for the cleaner cable management. Next,
oh yeah, when you're building a computer, you wanna read like where everything's located, like all the ports in that, so then you know that you don't plug in something wrong. Because if you plug in something wrong, something could not work, or it doesn't work how you thought it was supposed to, or it's not working how it's supposed to. That's what I'm letting you know.
next, it was time to bring out the case. The motherboard came with the I/O shield, so to not forget, I installed that first. It goes in the top left of the case, so I aligned it and pushed each corner in until I heard a snap. On my motherboard, there were 9 holes for it to screw into the case. So here I was checking if there were no extra things poking out that could scratch the back of it. There's a pin in the middle, which isn't a screw, but it will go in the middle hole. Also, the standoffs that lift the motherboard slightly from the back of the case were also pre-installed. Double-checked everything, no extra things poking out. So it was time to put it in. That's what he said. I first installed it with the I/O shield at a little bit of an angle to not scratch the back, and then made sure I can see each screw hole through the top. Seemed pretty good to me. I then randomly chose a pack of screws that came with the case. Started opening the pack on the top, but then...
Oh gosh. Don't open it up on top of the case. You can have something drop in there, and later when you boot up the computer, I couldn't correct the rotation, it could fall somewhere, maybe get into a fan, and then boom, that fan breaks, and then something bad could happen. because your components could maybe start throttling, which means they're working, but also being into extreme temperatures where they're not made for. That's not good at all. You don't want your computer or your components to thermal throttle, because that's just bad news right there.
Realized that if a screw falls in and I don't find it, it might be a big mistake. So I removed myself from the situation and then fastened in the motherboard with all 8 screws. Then I decided to connect the case fan cables to the motherboard. The top left one connects here, but the connector on the motherboard had 4 pins and this cable had 3 holes. The math didn't.
Okay, so people would also be scared about this. I'm just going to say this now. If it has a 4-pin connector, but only has 3 pins, like on your connector that you're plugging in, like on the motherboard there's 4, it only means that it draws less power. Like a fan doesn't need to use all 4 connectors, it just means that it just draws a little bit more power. If it has all 4, but it has 3, then it just draws less power than what they're giving.
Add up. Turns out it means that this fan consumes less power, and it's okay to plug it in as long as I align it well with the thing on the back. So I tried to cable manage the best I could, and eventually plugged it in. The other fan's cable was quite...
That's the thing about cable managing, it's that it's not always the best to do, because it could I'm just saying, like, not, because even though people like to manage everything, sometimes it's not the best to do it. Because you can then, if a cable is like being tugged, then it can break the connector. Because those are, I think they're pretty fragile pins. So it can break the connector, or it can make the connection loose. So then the fan or whatever doesn't work as properly. It's like if you had your power connector like being like tugged in that, it can maybe, like, if you press the power button, it doesn't really work correctly. Or it could just shut down the computer on accident or something. I don't know. But something could happen. So that's why I would, like, cable manage, but also make sure, like, you're not tugging on the cable.
Quite long, so I routed it through the back of the case and it popped out here. Then I also plugged it into the connector labeled CHA fan, presumably meaning chassis fan. And boom, there was nothing left to do on this side, so I moved to the back. On the back of the case, there were these cables that connect the front I/O to the motherboard. This is the USB 3.2 cable, the USB-C cable, the power switch with its LEDs. I knew that connecting this will be interesting, the front audio jack, and the reset button. Let's begin with the audio cable. It has one blank pin near the edge, and it goes in there, labeled AAFP, means analog audio front panel. So I routed it through the back and carefully plugged it in, trying not to bend the pins. Next I chose the USB-C cable and routed it through the side because it plugs in here. Took me a bit of thinking, but it goes in both ways, so it's pretty hard to screw this one up. Nice. Then the USB 3.2. From watching tutorials, I've heard that the pins on this one are really fragile and the connector is beefy, so it's easy to bend them. It goes in here. There's also a blanked out pin on the top left, so I carefully aligned that one with the missing pin on the connector and slowly pushed it in. Nice. Next I had this cable galore to deal with. All of them somehow go in this part of the motherboard. I opened the manual for this to make sure I don't do something you'd see and started with power LED plus and minus. Now I could have either plugged them in here at the top, but I didn't see it when I was building, so I opted for the place which would make connecting the other ones a lot harder. So I plugged both LEDs there with the words facing down like this. Then I targeted the power switch. It goes into these 2 pins, and I also did it words facing down. And finally, the reset switch. This one goes into these 2. I think, right next to the positive LED. So I plugged it in. Here's how everything looks. These are the LEDs, the power switch, and the reset switch below it. I've dealt with the cables I had, so it was time to put in the power supply. It goes in here at the bottom, and it took me a second to figure out that I was pushing against the back of the case here and not the power supply, and that's why it wasn't moving back. Yeah, that's what we're dealing with. I screwed in the provided screws and then realized I can't reach in and plug in the cables, so I unscrewed it. That's what we're dealing with. Now, the cables. It came with many cables in the box, but for this build I'm only going to need 3. The first is this motherboard cable that provides power to it. Well, they all provide power to it. The power supply. The part that splits apart goes into the power supply and the other end into the motherboard. Then we have the PCIe cable for the graphics card. The ends where it says PCIe goes into the graphics card, and the end with some weird numbers goes into the power supply spot labeled PCIe/CPU. Not very nice. Then we have the CPU cable, very hard to tell apart. The part with the numbers goes into the power supply again. Now I spent some time explaining all the cables that the power supply comes with, only to realize that there was a picture on the side of the box that did it for me. Very nice. Now that they were all in, I rotated the power supply and screwed it back in. It was time to plug everything in. I routed the CPU cable through the front because it plugs in here, and then somehow pushed it into the connector. Looks pretty good. Next, the beefy motherboard cable. It has this clipping mechanism on one side, just like all three of those cables, so I had to rotate it around, which took a little bit of wrestling, but eventually I got it in. And the last cable that was left went into the graphics card, which I hadn't yet put in the case, so it was time to do that. The graphics card goes in here, so I needed to unscrew this one and this one for it to fit. Then, just like with the RAM slots, I put this plastic thing down and brought in the beast. A few cables were getting in the way, but I eventually aligned it with the cutouts on the left and the slot that it goes into and pushed it firmly on both sides to slide it in. Then fastened it with the screws and it was installed. Back to the cable. This is where then I routed it through the bottom, which was way easier because there were no extra cables in my way, and plugged it into the GPU. And with that, the PC should be ready, I thought. So I plugged in a keyboard, a mouse, a monitor. Make sure to plug it into the graphics card and not the back of the motherboard, because you'll get like 30 FPS in your games. Console players will not understand. Then the power supply cable, make sure it's...
Yes, console players will not understand because there's only one HDMI port. On a computer, there's a few. Like you have one on the back of the motherboard, so then you can use like the internal GPU from the CPU. It's not the best, but it's something. And then you have the actual GPU, which is made for, or the GPU, so you can actually see stuff that's on your monitor. It's like that's why it's called a graphics card, because it shows what's on your monitor.
Switched on, and everything seemed to be working fine. Once I saw something on the monitor, I knew that the build was successful. But of course, it wasn't finished because the PC didn't have an operating system yet, the right drivers, and one of the CPU fans was going...
Oh yeah, so if you're wondering, so OS stands for operating system.
Crazy at 100% speed because I plugged it into the AIO pump socket. So I had to fix all of that. I started with the Windows installation. I typed in Windows 11 ISO and clicked first link. Obviously, you'll need a second Windows laptop or a PC to do this. So if you don't have one, do it before on your friend's computer or somewhere else. I wanted to create a new Windows installation, so I clicked download on the second link and it downloaded the tool. Then I needed to plug in a USB stick with at least 8 GB of space into the computer. You want to make sure there's nothing you need on the USB because it will be completely erased. Then I opened the file that I just downloaded, said yes, and the setup window opened. It will put Windows onto the USB stick. I accepted the license agreement after carefully reading through it, then deselected use recommended options for this PC. Next, I selected to install Windows through a USB drive, then selected my USB and left it there for 10 minutes to do its thing. Once it was ready, I clicked finish, pulled out the USB and plugged it into my new PC. And turned it on. Don't forget to switch on the power supply. Wonderful. I had to wait a little bit and it immediately booted into the Windows installation. So I clicked next a bunch of times, then selected Windows 11 Pro, clicked on a custom installation, and here it asked me where I want to install Windows. Since I wanted Windows to be on a separate disk partition and everything else, like my games and files, separated, I clicked on New and gave it 100,000 megabytes of space, which is 100 gigabytes. So now my C drive will have Windows and 100 gigabytes of space, and the rest will be separated into another drive letter. I clicked apply, OK, and it automatically selected the partition I just created, almost 100 gigabytes. So I clicked next and let it do its thing, which took way less time than I remember it taking from when I reinstalled Windows before. It restarted a bunch of times and then put me into to the setup screen. Now here, when it says let's connect you to a network, there's no option not to do that. And ideally you want to install Windows without an internet connection so it doesn't download a bunch of crap. So to do that, I hit Shift F10. I have a 60% keyboard, so for me Shift F10 is Shift function 0. And then the CMD window opened up. At first it didn't let me type anything in here, and that was because this window wasn't selected. That's what we're dealing with. So I clicked on it with my mouse, and then in all capital letters, I typed in OOBE, the backwards slash, and bypass NRO. Once I clicked enter, it rebooted, and now once I got to the Wi-Fi screen, I was able to choose I don't have internet connection and continue normally. Very nice. Let Microsoft apps use your location. No. Find my device. No. Send diagnostic data to Microsoft. Require only. Improve inking and typing. No. Get tailored experiences. No. Let apps use advertising ID.
No.
And boom! I was in. Now this wasn't over because I still couldn't connect to the internet and had to install all the drivers for everything to work as expected. So I went onto another computer and looked for ASUS motherboard drivers, then typed in the name of my motherboard, and once I selected it, I was able to choose driver and utility and download my LAN, aka internet, chipset, aka for the AMD parts, and audio drivers. I then transferred them to my PC via a USB stick. For the driver installation, I extracted the files, and for each of them, double-clicked on the setup file to install. I had to restart the PC, and finally, I had an internet connection. Now that I finally had a way to download stuff into the PC without a USB stick, I still needed to do a couple important things. Install my graphics card drivers, update the UEFI, or BIOS, then in the new BIOS, stop one of the fans from spinning at 100%, and enable one special setting to make the computer run way faster. But before I did all of that, I decided to change some annoying Windows settings. First, I went into the control panel, set the view to icons, and went straight into my mouse settings to disable mouse acceleration, which immediately felt so much better. Then I opened Microsoft Edge, went straight into settings, typed in start, and looked for disable startup boost. That way Edge stops starting up unnecessary processes with Windows. I also disabled continue running things in the background when Edge is closed, and went back to look for AMD GPU drivers. Clicked on the first link and downloaded the drivers onto Windows. But once I opened the installer, it told me to wait until Windows updates are finished, so I decided to tinker with Windows a little more. Also, if you have a 144Hz monitor, always go into System, Display, and Advanced Display to make sure your monitor is set to the highest refresh rate possible. If you bought a high refresh rate monitor and didn't set this here, make sure to double check. You might be running 60 Hz on a 144Hz monitor, which is a crime. All things on your display will become buttery smooth. I double checked if the AMD graphics card driver installer worked, and this time it opened. So I chose additional options, and I wanted to do a clean installation, so I checked factory reset, which removes all prior versions of the drivers. I clicked don't allow AMD to collect data and clicked next. I skipped all the bonus things it wants to install, and on the next window clicked install. While that was going on, I went into taskbar settings, disabled widgets, task view, and hit the search bar because I can easily access it by pressing the Windows key. Then I went into system and multitasking to configure how Windows snaps windows. I always disable when I snap suggest what to snap next to it because it's annoying. I disable show snap layouts when I hover over the maximize button because I never use it, and disable show snap layouts when I drag a window at the top of my screen because I also never use it. Then I went back to the GPU driver installer and it gave me the same error saying that I need to get rid of Windows updates first. So I let my PC update a bunch of times until there were no Windows updates left, and finally updated the driver, which installed the AMD software onto my PC. Now it was finally time to update the BIOS. So I typed in my motherboard name and BIOS update, which led me to this page where I was able to find and download the BIOS update tool. Then I turned on a tutorial for how to update BIOS, and all I had to do next was plug in an empty USB drive, then right-click, format, and set it to FAT32, and start. Once it was formatted, I double-clicked on the BIOS renamer tool and pressed any key to continue. That renamed the other file, which I then dragged onto the USB stick. Next, instead of pressing restart normally, I held Shift while I was doing it. This made my PC restart, but put me into this screen. I clicked troubleshoot, then advanced options, and there was the option to get to BIOS. UEFI basically means BIOS. It's just the modern version of it. So I clicked on that and my PC restarted into BIOS. Here I went into advanced mode, and under tool, I found ASUS Easy Flash utility. It's for flashing or updating BIOS. So I went into it and selected my USB. Actually, it was selected already, and I knew it was the USB because it was 29,000 megabytes, which is around 30 gigabytes, and that was the storage capacity of my USB. So then I selected the .cap file and clicked yes. And yes, once again. This started the BIOS update process, during which my PC restarted a couple of times. And one more important thing I learned from tutorials is that it's really important that the PC doesn't lose power during the BIOS update. That can cause a lot of problems. Thankfully, the power didn't go out. Once it finished, I got this screen which said 2024 on it. The first time I booted up the PC, it said 2023, which means the BIOS were updated. At the bottom, it said press F1 to enter setup, so I did that and I was back in. First things first, this is the setting I was talking about before. It's called AMD Expo or Intel XMP. Make sure to enable it. It allows your RAM to run at more powerful speeds. Then I went into the Q fan control and I wanted to set the AIO pump speed to be the same as my CPU fan speed, to make both my CPU fans to spin at the same speed. AIO pump is this connector where I plugged in one of my cooler fans. If I had plugged it in there, I wouldn't have to do this. So I chose manual and then dragged these points to match the curve that the CPU fan had. Beautiful. Then I clicked escape and save and exit at the bottom. My PC restarted and success. So now it was time to take her out for a spin. When Counter-Strike 2 came out, I wasn't able to play it because my Windows laptop was just too slow for it. So now I was excited to try it out. And oh baby, did this PC deliver. 1440p full max settings, which no one plays at, and also screen recording, and it was getting 200 FPS. That's what I got with my old laptop while looking at the ground at lowest settings. But then I lowered them a bit, and now it was averaging 400 FPS. Then I lowered the actual resolution that I play at, and I was seeing ridiculous numbers, above 500 FPS. Goal achieved. I was way too lazy to test out non-esports games, so here's Rocket League at max settings at 1440p resolution, 580 FPS. Let's quickly ignore the gameplay. One thing that I noticed though was that there was some sort of weird electric noise coming from the PC, which I've never heard before. What was even stranger was that when I limited my FPS, the noise became quieter. At first I thought it was fan noise, but then I disabled all the fans and the noise didn't become quieter. So I googled around and found out that it's called coil whine, and it's caused by tiny electronic components vibrating when electric current flows through them. I also found out that this noise is pretty much common for high-end GPUs, and there's almost always just a little bit of it. Worst of all, you can't get around it without replacing the GPU. Since for me the noise wasn't that loud and just surprising, I decided to ignore it. But what about my two other goals? One of which was video editing. Here's me scrubbing the timeline and there's barely any lag, which is exactly what I needed. So that's two goals completed, gaming and video editing. And the third, so the total price was 1555 euros, which is around this many US dollars. However, if you were to buy these exact parts from within the US, they would cost around this much from Amazon. As I said in the beginning, I'll leave all the parts linked in the description. Perfect. Now I have a killer PC that doesn't get in the way of me having fun and editing videos. Let's go.